Welcome to Manhwa recaps, spoilers ahead, watch out, and take care. The manhwa starts off with showing us a night sky, with someone talking about the senses of an assassin. We see a man being told good work, and his name is Lan. He looks up and says thank you, to a man named Sir Dareth. Lan says that his senses are telling him he will be killed by Dareth Robert tonight. Dareth tells him he's performed his tasks well, and it's thanks to his effort that the family has been growing quickly. Lan says he's just doing what he should be. Dareth asks him if he believes he needs freedom. Lan tells him that shadows are meant to follow orders, and he doesn't have his own thoughts or feelings. Dareth says if he knew all of this, why did he act on his own again, then asks how he undid his brainwashing. Lan begins to sweat nervously, wondering how he noticed. We learn that the brainwashing is a method in which the Robert family control their assassins, or also called shadows. They kidnap or buy children, then make them work as assassins doing all kinds of evil deeds, essentially turning them into loyal dogs. Lan was also brainwashed, but coincidentally was able to free himself. He asks Dareth how he knew, to which he replies all of the assassins have two collars. One is brainwashing, then he snaps his fingers, saying this was the second one. Lan begins to cough up blood as his chest tightens. He screams out in pain and falls to the floor. He clenches his chest, saying it feels as if his heart is being sawed in half. Dareth smiles, telling him it's called rageworm, and it's an insect inside his body that is eating his heart. Lan asks if brainwashing wasn't enough, saying he acted so righteous, but it's sickening. Dareth says it's called being thorough, and that there's a saying in which everyone wears a mask, and his mask just happens to be thicker than others. Lan angrily says his name, and explains how he doesn't remember much of his past, since he's just been raised as a loyal hunting dog, and as the head of the assassins he lived without his own mind or emotions, but he learned of a technique called Ring of Fire, ROF for short. It was a skill that belonged to the continent's greatest swordsman a long time ago, and it allowed him to escape the brainwashing. Lan says he thought he could finally achieve freedom, and he began to have hopes. So why is he meeting death instead of freedom? He wonders what types of sins he committed to have such a meaningless death. He grits his teeth, and yelling damn it, it can't end this way. He stands up saying if he'll die here, then he'll at least take his arm. Or injure him at least. He screams that he won't die so pathetically, then leaps forward at Dareth. We see a slash in Lan's eyes, then his head goes flying away from his body. It plops onto the floor, and Dareth stares at his lifeless body, thinking that he prevented everything. He says it's been a while, wondering when the last time he had an injury was. He says that at least Lan will forever hold that L. He tells his men to get rid of the body, and he walks away. Lan says that Dareth is the strongest martial artist on the continent, so it's a given he can't win against him, and there's nothing he can do about it. He quickly says there is, and that he's upset he had to live life like this, and that he's upset he was humiliated and manipulated all his life. He's upset he didn't comp life the ROF. He doesn't care if it's God or the devil, someone please answer. He needs his revenge no matter what. We see his necklace begins to glow blue. A window appears saying he's been chosen by rage, and it will possess his body, but then he gets an error since he died, and his eyes close. He opens them to see a butterfly in a field, and we see a woman saying Sonny look here, as she holds a toy. He says mama, and she asks him what it is, then he stretches his hands outward. She starts to say he's so cute, and he says he cannot get used to it, and the woman cuddling him is named Sylvia. And while it's hard to believe, she picks him up and tells him to say mom, he was reincarnated as this woman's child. With all of his memories of being an assassin, he thought he was just dreaming at first. We see his mother holding him, saying the weather is nice today, and she hopes the patriarch will be back soon. Then he can give her a handsome name. He says it makes sense that she can't call him Sonny forever. Lan starts to explain that he hasn't figured out much after reincarnating, but he understands he is in a wealthy house or renowned family. And he guesses it's better to be reborn into a powerful family than a normal one, but he still needs to get his revenge. The rage and desire for revenge are still always on his mind, but he must remain patient. Since he hasn't left the room, he doesn't know where he is, or his family's position is more important, let alone the situation he's in. He was also unable to complete the ROF, so he needs to stay patient. While he was the best assassin history in the Robert family, he needs to be better than he was previously. He says based on the family's mansion, it's much more than just a renowned family. The door slams open, and a maid tells Sylvia that the patriarch is coming. Sylvia is surprised, and says she needs to prepare, but the maid tells her it's too late. She begins to grow nervous, and then the door opens, and a pressuring aura enters the room. Lan wonders what this tension is. Then we see the man enter the room. We see he has blonde hair and a red cape, but Lan recognizes him. Sylvia calls out to him. He asks if this is a child. Lan says that his ice-cold or flame-like eyes he has to be the zenith of the continent. The king of annihilation, Glenn Zeekhart. He says that it seems like he's been reborn into the most powerful family on the continent. Sylvia asks her dad if he wants to hold him, then by some sort of ironic fate, he gives him the name of Lan, since it means shadow. So it's the second life and now he has the same name again. It cuts to night, and Lan wonders if everyone is asleep now. After suffocation he's finally gotten a chance. He says he was always sleeping, and when he wakes up Sylvia was with him, so he hasn't been able to use mana or anything, but now he gets to sleep alone. He sits up and sighs, then begins to cultivate his ROF. He explains how the continent's normal training method uses breathing, and you absorb nature's mana and gather aura in your energy core. However, ROF is like when a mage creates a mana circle around their heart, allowing him to grow in all stats, which makes it the best training technique, at least for becoming a martial artist that is. It has certain advantages that even Dareth isn't aware of, and since it allows him to train his mental too, so if he can make the Zeekhart swordsmanship him taking revenge on Dareth won't be a dream. He says he's unsure if it's because of his body's physique, but his body's mana circuit is filled with freezing energy. He also detects that he has 9 places being blocked. At this rate he's going to die because of them being blocked. So he needs to break through it using ROF, but just throwing the cold energy away is a waste. If he can fuse it with his flow, he can achieve something special. He opens his eyes to see that he fell asleep while cultivating, and he struggles to stay awake, then falls asleep again. We see his grandpa creep in by his bed, then he puts his hand over him. Then the next day comes, and Lan is schmoving down the hall. His mother calls out to him, encouraging him to crawl a bit more. Lan starts to complain about having to act like a baby, saying it makes him want to die. She asks what he can do, saying he's such a good boy. She hears a man's voice call out to her, and she's happy to see him. She calls him sir, then changes it to saint. He smiles saying to just call him sir. Lan recognizes him as the Saint of Rags. He's a man who has reached the ends of the world with power, techniques and skill. While he's the most famous physician you can find, he's never around due to his wanderlust. He says he heard she had a baby so he stopped by, then asks if Lan is her kid. I guess sage is an overstatement. He picks up Lan, says he's completely different from Glenn, then asks his name. She tells him, and he says surely she didn't name him because it means shadow, right? She says they did, then he asks him what Glenn is thinking. Lan says that since they are being casual with each other, it means the rumors of him and Glenn being best friends was true. Rags, his new name, says he'll take a look at Lan. He places his hand on him, and begins to analyze him. And says that his condition isn't good. Sylvia asks if there's a problem, and he tells her that Lan has the Bidical curse. So his mana is being blocked by ice energy, and before it gets difficult, they need to treat him often so he won't die. She says he's lying. He tells her he'll write a prescription. The maid quickly comes in saying that Patriarch is looking for him. He says he'll head there after his conversation. She says he said he would like to meet now. Rags sighs, saying that guy can't get his timing right, and reluctantly goes. Lan says that he finally understands the cold now, but knowing doesn't change anything, since he just needs to mold his ROF. His mother begins to cry and he's surprised. She says it's a lie while crying. She says she can't end like this, and it's impossible he will die. As she'll do whatever it takes to make him better, she says he can't die. Lan wonders what this emotion is, saying his heart is aching and it's painful. He says he doesn't want to see this, and he puts his hand on her cheek saying not to cry. She stops it, and he speaks perfect English, then says Mammy. It cuts to the Patriarch talking to Rags, and she bursts into the room, and a maid tries to stop her. She is out of breath, and Glenn asks what's the reason for her rudeness, to show such unsightly behavior. She gets on her hands and knees, saying she begs him to please save Lan. She says he must be aware of Lan's state, and he is her everything, so please save him. Glenn says that Lan shows how difficult it is to live as a martial artist, so why would he help someone who cannot contribute to the family? She says that he's still his grandson. He says it's the grandson she brought back after leaving her family behind, and all he can do is give him the Zeekhart name. She should be thankful he's doing this much. She begs out again, and he yells for her to be taken out. She continues begging him to save Lan, and cries out as they drag her out. Rags watches, and sighs, calling him stubborn. He asks if being honest is hard, asking why he's doing this when he called him over to look at his grandson. He says to shut up and tell him the details. Rags gives him the recap on it all, and says that thanks to Glenn pushing some of the cold air out he'll be fine for a bit, but it's nearly impossible for his grandson to be a martial artist. Glenn says he's fine with anything as long as he lives. Rags asks why he named him Lan. Glenn takes the cup away from his lips, saying that it doesn't just mean shadow, and he looks into the tea, saying that 1,000 years ago it held a different meaning. It cuts to later and we see Sylvia feeding Lan some medicine from Rags, but it reeks. He calls out to her and looks happy. She's happy he's enduring it, and even the maid is pogging out. Sylvia holds him close. Lan says well it's bitter, it's the fire medicine he needs the most right now, as the warm air pushes the cold air out from his circuits. It cuts to even later 2 whole years, after he started training and taking the medicine. We see he's achieved 1 ring in the ROF, then 2 more years passed. He explains how his days have been, with him playing with Sylvia and Helen in the morning, then around midnight and nap times he trains. After some more time passing, Lan is now 5 years old. We see that status window is back now, explaining how he has achieved the 2nd ROF. Lan smiles, saying he's finally done it, while looking at the window. He says now his mana senses have gotten more sensitive. He wonders if it's because of the window. Then he hears Helen talking. She asks if she can have his laundry. Then he watches her rummage through his clothes, and he realizes she cannot see the status window. He explains how it started appearing ever since he achieved the 1-star ROF. He says he wondered what it was at first, but it's a comfortable system that lets him gauge his current stats. And judging by Helen's reaction only he can see it. He says even though he's 2-star, his stamina is still low, and the biblical curse remains. He says if it weren't for the medicine, then his progress would be hard. During these last 5 years everyone in the annex has been making sure he is comfortable. Whenever he hurts they take care of him as if he's a prince. He sighs, saying that since he's only 5 he has a lot of time left, so he doesn't need to rush. The biblical curse and the low stamina are both problems, which is the reason he gets tired if he moves. But in his past life he was the greatest assassin, and since he's got the ROF, those weaknesses will be as good as gone. Especially after he learns the Zekeheart swordsmanship, he can cut Dareth's neck. But due to how strong Dareth is, he needs to take it slow, and when the opportunity arises, seize it. Sylvia enters the room, and she told him that they have somewhere to go today. So change and get ready to go to the main building. For some reason now the author decides it's a good time to explain that the continent is run by the 6 emperors and 5 demons. Of them, the Zekeheart family belongs to the 6 emperors. The emperors represent good influence, while the demons threaten the peace, and there are several powers outside of them as well, and they have a judgment ceremony to see if the powers are good or bad. Today is the Zekeheart's judgment day. As he enters we see a lot of people are attending it today, and they are discussing everyone who is participating in the ceremony. Someone mentions Sylvia, and they call her an outcast. She enters the room, and everyone looks at her with disdain. They realize that Lan is her kid and are pretty much expecting him to fail, since they make the standard drop. Lan says he dislikes how they are treating his mother, and when he hears them call her shameless, it angers him. She tells him that it's okay, and to just look at her. He doesn't say anything. The patriarch begins to enter the room, and Lan says that it's been a long time. Glenn takes a seat, and we see him looking down, and he says it seems like everyone is here. He motions his hand, as a giant sword falls from the sky. Lan says it's the sword of judgment, and Glenn says it's time for the ceremony to start. Lan explains that if you put your hand on the stone the sword determines their mana ability. Some guy says they will begin with Burn Zekeheart, and the kid says here. As he does his exam, Lan explains how a child's mana ability remains stagnant after 4. And the ceremony that takes place to determine their mana ability is right here in the judgment ceremony. We see the burn gets wind, and people are excited. Glenn tells him it's a good attribute for a swordsman. Then we see the next is a girl named Runin Sleon. Lan says he understands now that the further the mana travels up, the purer it is, and the mana's attribute is shown by the tip of the sword. And this is how they determine talent. He also comments how the people here value talent as much as their life. He says he probably won't get good results, even with a 2-star ROF. He still has a lot of cold air inside of his circuits. But the results do not matter. They finally call for the last person, and the room is filled with disgust, as it is shown to be Lan. Sylvia tells him to go. He tells her okay. Then thinks about how he doesn't have much expectations. He just needs to find out which mana attribute suits his body. She tells him to do what the other kids did. He tells her he's got it. Then lets out a sigh. He touches the sword, and we see it glow orange. He wonders what is this light he is seeing, and then his vision begins to transform into that of a scene of a child's drawing of Pokemon, with a man standing before them. One of them get close to the man, as Lan is directly behind the man. He wonders who he is. The man points his sword into the sky, as the same aura we saw a second ago envelops it, but we cannot see his face. He then swings down, killing the monsters in front of him, creating a massive explosion. Lan then opens his eyes, and is surprised. While nobody else experienced what he saw, they instead laugh due to how little aptitude he has, and Glenn looks disappointed. His mother comforts him, saying he did good, while the rest of the room continue to flame him, saying at least he has guts, but the only thing he inherited is blonde hair and red eyes. Glenn tells them to stop yapping, as it's too loud in here. Then orders them all to leave, since the ceremony is now over. The randoms keep smiling, and everyone leaves besides Glenn and Alfred. Glenn says he guesses it can't be helped, while he had no expectations. Is that really all there is to Lan? The sword begins to emanate the same aura from before Lan saw the flashback, and Glenn is surprised as the sword erupts with the aura. Glenn is still shocked, then says it's golden like the sun, then recalls a book mentioning how the first Zekehart's patriarch had displayed transcendental fire that could even melt the flames of the demon realm. Golden mana and flames, which was a one-time occurrence throughout the family history. The mana will shine radiantly like the sun, and it is called golden flames. Glenn wonders what is going on. Back to Lan's point of view, we see that his traits are still not unlocked, and he decides it's time to go for 3 stars on his ROF. We learn 7 years have already passed since the first judgment ceremony. So now he is 12. For some reason the scanlator group says 21, math isn't their strong suit. Now he is able to reach the doorstep to the 3rd stage, and he would have been able to progress quicker if he could do something about the cold. His tolerance for water also became 2 stars, so the coldness has disappeared. And he decides to start physical training too. We hear his mother asking what he's doing here, saying he needs to get ready before they are late. It's now time for the 2nd judgment ceremony. So he'll need to see those annoying bastards again. It skips to the end of the ceremony. Lan says that it ended much earlier than expected. Then Glenn calls out his name, saying he's sure he's received orders to attend basic training, so why has he not responded for an entire month? Lan is confused as to what he's talking about, and Sylvia yells saying he's different from other children, as he has too much cold energy to endure the training. Glenn says that this is their land, as there are no exceptions for someone of the Zekehart name. She begs that they give him a little bit of time, and he asks if she'll leave the family again with that child. She begins to grow anxious as he tells her she must live as a Zekehart, and if she doesn't want to, then leave. Everyone begins to laugh, saying watch her run away again, and it would be interesting to watch, but she cannot have her mana circuits destroyed a 2nd time. Then they scoff while calling her pathetic. Lan says he understands why they treat his mother poorly, as she's left the family before. She has traces of having learned martial arts, but has no aura since she broke her energy core and mana circuits. She left the family to marry his father, but he died during her pregnancy, giving her no choice but to come back. It's obvious why a direct lineage who left and crawled back would be treated poorly. But that's just what the others think. Since he is now her son, he will not watch her be treated like this. She asks what he's doing as he approaches the sword, saying she'll take care of this. He tells her it's fine, and as Glenn has ordered, he will begin attending training next month. The current Martial Hall Master asks if he really didn't know, saying that it's not something he can endure, so just give up. Lan says that it's okay, he needs to live up to the family name, so he will attend the training. Glenn lets out an aura, asking if he understands the weight of the words he just spoke. The aura flies past Lan, and he begins to bleed, saying it feels as if he is being crushed. Just his look can do this. Then he realizes Glenn is much stronger than Robert, saying he fits the name King of Annihilation. Sylvia says he's still young, he doesn't know what he's said. The Martial Hall Master agrees, saying to calm down. Glenn tells them he is speaking right now, scaring both Sylvia and the hall monitor. She quickly grabs Lan, saying she's sorry, but he isn't in the state to train, so please stop with the aura. Lan's face looks pained, and mentions for the 8th time how he lived as an assassin, and was always closer to death than life. But he refuses for that to be the case anymore, as he will no longer hide in the darkness, and will no longer live as the assassin Lan. He grits his teeth, saying he will bring his mother back to his original position, and he walks forward. He says he doesn't know the weight of the words, since he was raised in a separate building. He doesn't know how powerful their family is, so he would like to learn through training. And he will protect Sylvia, as well as the smiles and joy of those around them. Glenn asks if he's saying he will judge the Zekeheart standards through training. Lan says it's the only choice he has. Glenn says he'll make sure the instructor prepares accordingly, so he isn't disappointed. Lan then falls over, saying he used to be the best assassin, but now with his current potential, he will show them all how strong he will become. We see some kids training, and then we are introduced to the other martial hall master, Karun Zekeheart, saying it wasn't Lan meant to be too weak to even move properly, and someone else is telling him yes, and that a maid overheard the conversations between Rags and the patriarch. So he is definitely suffering from an illness. Karun says that Lan's body was definitely in an abnormal condition both today and all the other times he's seen him, so how was he able to endure father's aura? He says thinking about it, Sylvia was more talented than anyone else, so place a maid into their building, and do it quickly, and make her report everything that she can find. We see at the 5th hall, Glenn is walking through it, and everyone bows to him, except a red-haired elf. Glenn tells him to stop pretending to be asleep, and get up Lemur. He says it's amazing that he's the only person his sleeping techniques don't work on. Glenn says everyone else is working hard, except him, the head instructor. Lemur says they are just following his orders. He's working with his head, while they work with their bodies. Glenn says he doesn't mature even after 50 years. Lemur says people don't change easily. Then asks if he's here because of his youngest grandson, then tells him that Sylvia also came to see him, but didn't expect Glenn to come too. She asked Lemur to make sure he doesn't get injured. So if Glenn has come to make the same request, he's wasting time, as he won't make any exceptions even if he's the youngest. Glenn says alright and not to lessen the intensity of training, as he doesn't want weaklings. Lemur recognizes something, then stops himself and starts acting all giddy, saying he must really love his grandson and some other stuff. Glenn says if he wasn't his friend he'd be on the floor right now. He tells Lemur not to go easy and fail anyone who is unworthy, that way only the worthy can receive his training. Lemur says he'll do as he wishes, then Glenn takes his leave. Lemur thinks about Lan, wondering what he's like. Then we see his status window, saying he's achieved the 3rd ROF, making him a 3-star, which then reduces his curse of bitter cold. Lan says it definitely feels different, and his sensitivity has increased so his mind feels clearer than before. We see his mother comforting him after training, which is helping him learn his limits, and his status window is helping his growth speed up. But this is just the beginning, as their training is infamous for its difficulty, and being a 3-star is just the first step. He needs a good foundation in order to be able to progress smoothly. And for him to excel more than anyone else, so those who mock him will shut up, then after that the heavenly sword Saint Dareth will have to be clapped. His mother enters the room, saying she's surprised he's still up. He asks what she's doing here so late. She says since he's going to the training hall, she wanted to talk to him before he leaves. Then she asks if he must go, saying she wants to stop him, since he never expresses it when he's hurting, and what if he gets badly injured. She says it's not she doesn't want him to go, how about postponing for a year? He tells her no, as he can't stand when people insult her, especially the disgusting faces they make while shit-talking her. So if he does well in training he believes she won't receive such treatment anymore. She smiles, saying she's sure he's wondering why people treat them so poorly. Then she explains how she fell in love with his father during a mission, but it was difficult to be with him, due to him being a normal knight. So she ruined her core in circuits, and left the family. Then she tells him he actually had an older sister too. She was 2 years older than him, and her name was Sia. But they were ambushed, and his father wasn't that strong, and she was pregnant. So they couldn't do anything, but his father hired guards to keep them safe, but they were obviously terrible since they came way too late. And both his father and sister were brutally murdered. And she didn't know what else to do, but return to the family, which is why she is treated so poorly, but it's not like she can say anything against it. He thinks about how she is selfish. She threw away responsibility in the name of love, and crawled back afterward, and he understands why they treat her so poorly now. But she's the first person to show him affection, even though she is selfish. She is the only mother he's ever had. He asks her if she regrets her choices. She says no she doesn't, since she lived like she was invisible in the family, but after leaving she felt like a real person. She was happy then, and she is happy now. She says she's sorry for being a bad mother. He tells her that he's fine so she shouldn't worry about it. He smiles looking at her, saying he will get his revenge after helping her get her position back in the family. She begins to cry, and bawl like a baby. It cuts to a bit after and he says, reassuring her was difficult. And he'll need to check the ROF and sleep, since he doesn't have long until training. He begins to check it, saying it's spinning faster. Now he's a 3-star, then wonders how the later levels will be. A blue aura begins to appear in front of him, and begins to speak, saying it's finally time, and that his rage has reached them, and they introduce themselves as Wrath, the second lord of the demon realm. Lan is confused, and we see that his hidden trait is being unlocked, and that it's rage. Wrath says if he sacrifices his soul and body, then realizes Lan is just a child. Lan asks who he is, and Wrath says he wants to know who he is, and that the rage he felt wasn't an emotion a child could feel. Then it notices something, saying that never mind, and it was truly his rage, and he's just hiding it deep down. Wrath then asks for him to give his body and soul, then he will help get the revenge he desires. Lan wonders if it's the rage towards Dareth that he is feeling, then says he doesn't need Wrath's help, as he'll do it himself. As he doesn't want help from someone else. Wrath says he's misunderstanding something, as this isn't a negotiation. The decision is already made, and he begins to grow in size over Lan, who begins to feel an intense cold. Wrath says all he needs to do is give his body up, and dives at him. As he gets closer to Lan, it begins to cover the room in the blue ore, even freezing some water. Lan says it feels like his mind is freezing over, then Wrath begins to take the appearance of Dareth, saying to let the rage flow, and even if he is a god, he will die. Lan says he's enduring due to his water attribute, but this isn't just cold. Wrath is consistently stimulating his rage from within, then he whispers into Lan's ear as Dareth. Lan says he doesn't know what Wrath would do, if given the body, so he cannot let it be a possibility. Wrath says it's easier to accept, and there's no reason to be holding on. He wants to minimize the damages, since he'll be using his body, but he leaves him no choice. He'll just swallow him whole without waiting. Lan says his body feels like it's breaking, and he cannot hold on much longer. At this rate he will die. Then he notices something, saying if he can endure the cold because of his water attribute, then he can lower the pain with his ROF. It's the only option he has to survive currently. He begins to channel it, and Wrath begins to grow nervous as he is being fought off. He says how is this possible, even if he just awakened it makes no sense. Lan firmly tells him he will get revenge on his own, and he won't let some ghost use his body. Wrath is angry he caught it direct like that, saying he was a demon lord. Lan starts taunting him, saying he guesses it doesn't mean shit, seeing as how he cannot beat him. He recalls Wrath saying he just awakened, so it must be why he cannot use his full power. Then he notices the status window appear, saying new abilities unlocked. Wrath says that's his window, so why does Lan have it? Lan asks him what he means, and Wrath explains he made the system, so why is it with him? Lan asks why he made it, and Wrath says he isn't answering. But Lan understands it's to gauge progress, and Wrath is surprised. Then Lan punches through him, and says he hit him with mana just in case. But it assures he doesn't have a physical form, since nobody has come in despite the ruckus. So only he can probably see him. He shoos Wrath away, until he says enough. Then flies at Lan, and goes to his wrist turning into a flower bracelet. Wrath says it hasn't been long since his seal was lifted, but once he regains power it's Joe over. Lan says he wants to get rid of him ASAP, but that might remove the system too, and who knows what he would do to Sylvia. So he will keep him close, and restrict him so he can grow faster. Then he asks why he's a flower bracelet, and Wrath says to respect his preferences. Lan agrees. Then the next day we see Helen comforting Sylvia. As Lan comes down the stairs, saying he's ready, and he will be heading off now to the training hall. They tell him not to push himself too much, and he tells them he will be careful. Helen asks Sylvia if she's going to send him off with such a sad face. She tells Lan she believes in him. He tells her not to worry, and he'll give up if it's too difficult. He waves and leaves. Sylvia wonders if he'll be okay. Well, he is much better now, he is still sick. Helen tells her that Lemur has the best insight of all the Z-cards, and she's sure he'll be fine. We see she was bawling again seeing him off. He reminds her he'll run if it gets tough. She decides to trust in him. Praying he comes back unhurt, and he walks off. At the training hall we see a lot of kids. Since it's not just the Z-cards family, but also other students from outside. According to Helen, there are a lot of people this year, so the 6th hall is also helping. We see some kids trash talking him for being a disgrace, even taking a shot at Wrath's bracelet. Wrath says he'll rip their eyeballs out. Lan says instead of buzzing behind people's backs, they need to say it to his face. They say someone of the indirect bloodline shouldn't talk, and he says they aren't either, so why are they yapping, and the tone they are using are for those below them. One of them grab his collar, and readied their fist, and Lan is ready to clap back. And another kid says to stop. It's the Burn kid from earlier on saying the outsiders are putting shame on the family name. They back off out of fear, and Burn tells Lan to learn his place. And he's nothing more than dust, so if he doesn't want to be kicked out, lay low. Since back then getting Glenn's attention was just luck, and he used the situation to his advantage, and a loser will fail the training. He tells Lan if he isn't going to behave to leave, since he won't pass. Lan says he sure likes to spout bullshit, then asks what he is, saying the only thing he has is direct lineage, so what right does he have to talk to him? Then says he understands if he runs to Daddy. Burn gets angry, then Lemur kicks the door open as they go to talk, and he says they are already fighting. Lan recognizes Lemur, saying he didn't expect him to be here. Burn clicks his tongue and leaves. Lemur then introduces himself to them all. He says he heard there are 160 people, and that's way too many. So he's going to reduce the numbers down to a quarter. The students begin to get scared. Wrath says he'll rip the L's ears off, and Lemur says his word here is law. If they have a problem they can talk to Glenn. Then asks what they are waiting for in Turan. Some of the kids mentally check out, then they start hauling cheeks. Wrath asks Lan why he's running all the way in the back. He says it's not a competition, and there's no need to get past those guys. He says Lemur looks at others' potential and temperament. The winner of the test is the one who endures until the end. We see Sir Burn and Lady Runin are at the front. The people watching say well everyone is fast, they are especially so. They are only 12, yet they are already at the level I'm scared to see what they'll be like in the future. Then they see Lan, gassed out in the back, but say that he's sick so it's amazing he can handle this much. Lemur begins to smile, saying it's interesting, as he's never seen someone like this before. He explains how he thought the humans whose talents he couldn't calculate were the continent's strongest, as he couldn't see the depths of their power. He can see most of the children's futures, but Lan he cannot sense anything. Which means he's stronger than he is, and out of his reach. The kids from earlier say it's funny the arrogant one is in last place, he'll soon be failed. Lan says there's no way, they're just running even though it's meant to be training. He explains how in his past life he would run like hell from beasts. This is just way too easy. They continue just running. Lemur wonders how he's running since his stamina was exhausted long ago. It's way past the boundary of determination at this point. He wonders how he has the same kind of mentality as people who have trained to the brink of death. Burn turns around and sees Lan right behind him, wondering how he's running when he was meant to be sick. And he recalls overhearing the doctors talking about Lan's health, and he says it's annoying. Then he begins to utilize aura, saying he'll show him how much better he is. He quickly takes first place, surprising Lan, but Runin doesn't seem fazed. Lan says he's still just a kid, but Runin is more mature than he is. Either way it's not a competition, it's a free side quest to fight your own mental. After a bit most of the kids are gassed out, and they wonder how Lan is still running, wondering if he doesn't get tired. Lan says that's nonsense, since he feels like he's about to die. And he feels like his heart is about to collapse at any moment, but he's utilizing the ROF to squeeze out the last bit of his stamina. At the very least it's improving quickly, and he needs to activate it at its full force to feel the effects. As he's happy, Wrath says this is pitiful that his future vessel is in such a state, then tells him to hand over his body. Lan says not now, and Wrath says he'll freeze everything, then attacks Lan, making him feel a sharp pain in his body. He grits his teeth, saying he must endure his mind being taken over, and he needs to pretend nothing is wrong. He tells Wrath to stop, since it won't work on him. Wrath says nobody can withstand his rage, then he says let's see how long he can endure. Lan says he must endure, since if he shows any weakness, Wrath will swallow him whole. Wrath begins to mold, but Lan says he feels like he's about to die, and his body won't listen to him. His vision begins to blur, and he starts to lose his breathing. He wonders if it's his limit, then Lemur says it's enough. Lan begins to pant, and Runin stares at him. Wrath asks how he withstood it, and Lan says he warned him it wouldn't work. But he's happy it grew his ROF, and his physical strength too. A window appears saying he's received experience, and Wrath asks how this is possible, saying this is stupid. Lemur congratulates everyone, then says what he mentioned before the test was just a lie to get everyone motivated. But if they show the same results as today they will fail. Out of all of the 160 today, only one of them ran until the absolute end. Some people used aura to cheat. Well, he doesn't care how they do it, since they are the ones taking the test. But if they do as he says, they won't fail the test. He says now they just need to pass the test in 6 months to become official trainees. And he will pick the top trainees, but he won't be ranking them. He says they can go to their dorms now, and visit the training center. We see Lemur going into the woods, running into Glenn. He tells him he's in his napping spot, and Glenn asks him what's Pop Pin. Lemur says he saw the test for himself, so why ask, and he knows how great his eyes are, and Runen and Burn are talented, but they knew that. Some of the other kids too, but he can't sense anything in Lan. He was also out of stamina, so how did he keep running? It's the first time after Glenn he hasn't been able to sense something. And his life has been boring ever since his core was ruined, but now it's interesting. Glenn tells him he chose to be an instructor, so don't forget his duties. He says of course, since he thinks he found someone he can leave his future to. Glenn says it's a coincidence since Lan can't become a martial artist. Lemur smiles saying he knows it isn't a coincidence too. Lan says since that's over he'll head to the training center. Wrath says he doesn't know when to stop. The other kids look at him with pure disdain. They talk amongst themselves, saying it's impossible and there's no way he held on that long, and surely he cheated. We learn one of the kids is named Crane, who suggests he took some kind of miracle medicine, and he heard the Saint of Rags gave him one a long time ago. Crane says on that note, they need to teach him a lesson. We see Lan being thrown into a tree, who asks why they are doing this. One of the random kids barks at him for cheating with a miracle medicine, and his boy backs him up, saying he's using dirty tricks. They tell him not to be scared, they are just here to talk. Crane tells him that these things happen often. Then he goes to punch at Lan, and Wrath asks if he's just going to take this shit. Then Lan just clocks Crane in the face, surprising the other kids. And even Wrath. Lan says if they just want to talk, let's fucking talk. Random number 2 punches at him, and he blocks it and kicks him in the stomach. The other kid asks what he's doing, then gets socked in the face too. And while Crane is down, he kicks him again. Wrath says he's doing well, and it was fun to watch. Then he goes back and hits the other kid in the face again. They fall onto the floor and complain, and Crane apologizes. But Lan puts his feet onto his hands, saying before he stops he has one thing to ask. The masked Burn was the one who made them do this. Crane says no, and they did this without Burn knowing. He says that's unexpected, he thought he hated him. But he guess he's not that far gone. He says alright, he assumes he won't go around telling others about their conversation. Lan grabs onto his hair, saying he better avoid him if he doesn't want to have another conversation. Crane says he won't even step on his shadow, and apologizes. Lan says if he understood, then fuck off. We see Lemur watching this, smiling in the background, saying it was nice to watch that, it was like seeing young Glenn. We see that Wrath was satisfied with his actions, and increased his agility, but Wrath is confused by this. Lan says he's the one who made it. Wrath says he didn't expect it to be taken away from him, and that he's just stealing it from him. Lan says is that so, and Wrath asks for him to show some gratitude. Then says he has an offer for him, and he would like to bet on something. If he wins he will give him all of the exp, and if he loses he will accept his rage. We see it's for him to pass as a top trainee, and if he wins he will get a trade option, and he asks about it. To which Wrath tells him he'll be given one of his traits. Lan then asks what the rage penalty is. And Wrath says he'll just take some rage he possesses, and while it's not a lot, with enough he won't be able to control himself anymore. Lan recognizes what he's aiming for, and says since he usually behaves, he doesn't believe he's lying. Plus the rewards for winning are much greater than the risks. He then accepts the bet, and Wrath says that's a good choice. He says if he utilizes his past life, he will not lose. The next day we see the kids are all gassed out, and Lemur explains that the horse stance pose is the building blocks for all martial arts, and he's not forcing them to stay in it, since they are taking the test, not him. They begin to complain, asking how it helps with swordsmanship. Burn tells them to stop complaining, and they can just go practice swordsmanship now. Lan watches them leave. Wrath asks if he'll join them with their swordsmanship practice, and Lan says he doesn't need to, as it's a waste of time to train swordsmanship when you're not trained in the basics. And what he needs now isn't a sword, but basic physical strength. His body is weaker than others due to the Bittercult curse, and basics are the most important, since they will build a solid foundation. He doesn't need to feel rushed, so he will just focus on his body for now. We see while he's doing some exercises, Runen is watching from afar, and she's talking about how the weight he's lifting is increasing daily, and while it's a given you can improve daily, the weight going up daily is nonsense. Then she wonders if he has a different aptitude when training, then wonders how he's so consistent. She starts to approach them, saying there's something about him. She stands before him, then he asks why she is here. But she just NPC stares at him.